George Peppard utterly hated Mr. T. Now we know the reason why, and what happened on the A-Team set would destroy their friendship forever, costing Hollywood one of its most explosive partnerships. Picture this. Two of television's biggest stars, trapped together for 5 grueling years, forced to pretend they were brothers in arms while secretly plotting each other's professional destruction. One was a classically trained theater veteran who'd shared the screen with Audrey Hepburn. The other was a mohawked powerhouse who'd emerged from Chicago's toughest streets to become America's most unlikely superstar. What could possibly go wrong? Everything. By the time the A-Team wrapped, George Peppard allegedly wouldn't even speak Mr. T's real name, referring to him only as the other guy. The hatred ran so deep that Peppard reportedly threatened to quit the show multiple times, and their final confrontation was so explosive that studio executives had to physically separate them. But why? What transformed two professionals into sworn enemies? The answer lies buried in Hollywood's most toxic set, where egos collided like freight trains and careers hung in the balance. Hit that subscribe button. You're about to witness the most devastating celebrity feud that television tried desperately to hide. Who was George Peppard? To understand the volcanic hatred that would consume George Peppard, you must first understand the man himself, a complicated, brilliant, and ultimately tragic figure whose demons were forged in the fires of his tumultuous childhood. Born October 1st, 1928, in Detroit, Michigan, George William Peppard Jr. entered the world during the final gasps of the Roaring Twenties, just before the Great Depression would reshape America forever. His father, George Sr., was a building contractor whose stern German-American work ethic would haunt young George for decades. His mother, Vernelle, was a former opera singer whose artistic dreams had been crushed by the harsh realities of marriage and motherhood. The Peppard household was a powder keg of unfulfilled ambitions and simmering resentments. George Sr. demanded perfection from his son, while Vernelle whispered stories of the glamorous stage life she'd abandoned. Young George became the rope in their emotional tug-of-war, pulled between his father's practical expectations and his mother's artistic fantasies. When George was just 6 years old, the family moved to Dearborn, where his father's construction business began to flourish, but prosperity couldn't heal the fractures in the Peppard home. George Sr. worked 18-hour days, leaving his son starved for approval and attention. The boy found solace in books and movies, developing an almost obsessive fascination with the silver screen heroes who seemed to possess everything his real-world father lacked: charm, confidence, and effortless masculinity. High school brought the first glimpses of the man George would become. Tall, athletic, and devastatingly handsome, he was the kind of teenager who made other boys nervous and girls swoon. But beneath that golden boy exterior lurked a perfectionist who drove himself to exhaustion, pursuing excellence in everything from football to debate team. EMPH. Nothing was ever good enough for George Peppard, a trait that would both fuel his success and destroy his relationships. The defining moment of young George's life came in 1946, when he enlisted in the United States Marine Corps. At 18, he was desperate to prove his manhood to a father who seemed incapable of offering approval. The Marines promised to forge him into the kind of man George Sr. might finally respect. Boot camp at Parris Island was a crucible that would shape Peppard's character forever. The brutal training, the absolute hierarchy, the demand for instant obedience, these became the templates by which he would judge every relationship for the rest of his life. Years later, colleagues would describe working with Peppard as serving under a demanding drill sergeant who expected military precision in everything from script memorization to wardrobe choices. The Marines also exposed young Peppard to a level of physical and mental toughness that would define his self-image for decades. He excelled in combat training, earned marksmanship badges, and demonstrated natural leadership abilities that his superiors noted in glowing reports. For 2 years, Peppard lived in a world where hierarchy was clear. Orders were followed without question, and excellence was rewarded with respect and advancement. But the Marines also gave Peppard something more dangerous than confidence, an unshakable belief that he was destined to command others. He graduated as an exemplary Marine, earning the respect of his superiors and the loyalty of his fellow recruits. For the first time in his life, George Peppard knew exactly who he was and what he was capable of achieving. When his service ended in 1948, Peppard faced the jarring transition back to civilian life, a world where his military credentials meant nothing and his natural authority had no outlet. This disconnect between his self-perception as a leader and society's indifference to his military background would fuel decades of frustration and control issues. Returning to civilian life, Peppard enrolled at Purdue University to study civil engineering, a practical choice that would have made his father proud. But fate had other plans. During his sophomore year, he wandered into a campus theater production and experienced what he later described as an epiphany that changed everything. Watching the actors command the stage with such authority and grace, Peppard realized he'd found his true calling. The theater offered something that civilian life had been denying him, a legitimate arena where his need to control and command could be channeled into artistic expression. On stage, directors were generals, leading actors were officers, and supporting players were enlisted personnel in service of a greater creative mission. Against his father's thunderous objections, George transferred to Carnegie Tech, now Carnegie Mellon University, to study drama. The decision created a permanent rift with George Sr., who considered acting a frivolous pursuit for pretty boys and weaklings. This rejection would fuel Peppard's lifelong need to prove his masculinity and toughness, traits that would later clash catastrophically with Mr. T's street-smart persona. Carnegie Tech was where George Peppard, the actor, was truly born. Under the tutelage of demanding professors who valued discipline and technique above natural talent, he learned to channel his perfectionist tendencies into his craft. His classmates remember him as intensely focused, almost obsessively dedicated to understanding every aspect of his character's motivations and backgrounds. But even in the supportive environment of drama school, Peppard's controlling nature began to emerge. He reportedly clashed with directors who didn't share his vision, and fellow students found him difficult to work with despite his undeniable talent. One professor allegedly told him, "George, you have the talent to be a great actor, but you need to learn that collaboration isn't surrender," advice he would never fully accept. During his final year at Carnegie Tech, Peppard began developing the acting philosophy that would define his entire career: total immersion in character combined with absolute control over his professional environment. He studied method acting techniques, but adapted them to his military mindset, treating each role like a mission that required strategic planning and tactical execution. Graduating in 1955, Peppard moved to New York City with dreams of Broadway stardom dancing in his head. The reality was far harsher than his artistic ambitions had prepared him for. He waited tables, worked construction jobs that reminded him painfully of his father's world, and auditioned for roles that seemed always just beyond his reach. The lean years in New York were perhaps the most formative of Peppard's life. Living in a cramped studio apartment on the Upper West Side, surviving on coffee and determination, he began to develop the siege mentality that would characterize his later Hollywood career. Every rejection felt personal, every callback was a battle to be won, and every successful actor represented competition to be defeated. During this period, Peppard also began his pattern of intense, controlling relationships with women. His first serious girlfriend, a struggling dancer named Margaret, later described their relationship as living with a beautiful dictator who planned every date like a military operation. She allegedly left him after he tried to choreograph her career decisions with the same precision he applied to his own auditions. The breakthrough came in 1957, when he landed a small role in The Strange One, a gritty military drama that showcased his natural intensity and commanding screen presence. Critics noticed the tall, dark stranger with the piercing blue eyes and magnetic charisma. Hollywood scouts began circling like sharks sensing blood in the water. But success in Hollywood would prove to be a double-edged sword for George Peppard. His first major film role came in 1961's Breakfast at Tiffany's, where he played the kept man Paul Varjak opposite Audrey Hepburn's iconic Holly Golightly. The role should have made him a leading man overnight, but Peppard reportedly clashed with director Blake Edwards over the character's portrayal. Peppard wanted Paul to be stronger, more traditionally masculine. Edwards envisioned a sensitive, vulnerable man who could match Hepburn's complex femininity. The tension on set was palpable, with Peppard allegedly referring to his character as a gigolo in a suit and demanding script changes that would make Paul more assertive. The conflict with Edwards revealed a fundamental problem that would plague Peppard throughout his career: his inability to surrender creative control to directors he didn't respect. Having been trained to lead, he found it almost physically painful to take orders from filmmakers whose vision conflicted with his own masculine ideals. Despite the behind-the-scenes drama, Breakfast at Tiffany's was a massive success, and Peppard found himself thrust into the spotlight as Hollywood's newest heartthrob. But rather than embrace his newfound fame, he seemed almost resentful of it, as if success achieved through playing a weak character somehow diminished his accomplishment. The 1960s brought a string of leading roles that showcased Peppard's range and magnetism. The Carpetbaggers, The Blue Max, Newman's Law. He was handsome enough for romantic leads, tough enough for action roles, and sophisticated enough for dramas. By all accounts, George Peppard should have become one of the decade's biggest stars. Instead, he became known as one of Hollywood's most difficult leading men. Stories began circulating about Peppard's demanding behavior on sets. Directors complained that he questioned every creative decision, rewrote dialogue without permission, and treated supporting actors like subordinates in his personal army. One cinematographer allegedly said, "Working with George is like being directed by someone who's never directed anything but expects everyone to follow orders without question." His personal life was equally turbulent. Married 3 times by 1975, Peppard seemed incapable of maintaining stable relationships with women who challenged his need for control. His first wife, Helen Davies, reportedly left him because she felt like a prop in George's carefully orchestrated life. His second marriage to Elizabeth Ashley, a successful actress in her own right, ended in a bitter divorce marked by allegations of emotional manipulation and professional jealousy. The pattern was always the same. Peppard would be attracted to strong, independent women, then gradually attempt to reshape them according to his vision of the perfect partner. When they inevitably resisted his control, he would become cold and distant, ultimately driving them away through emotional withdrawal. Can you imagine the pressure building inside a man who demanded perfection from everyone around him, but could never find peace within himself? By the late 1970s, Peppard's film career was stalling. The industry had moved beyond the traditional leading man archetype he represented, embracing grittier, more vulnerable heroes like Al Pacino and Robert De Niro. Peppard found himself increasingly typecast as the handsome but cold authority figure, roles that paid well but offered little artistic satisfaction. The changing landscape of Hollywood in the post-Vietnam era was particularly brutal for actors like Peppard, whose screen persona was built on traditional masculine ideals that younger audiences were beginning to question. Anti-heroes were replacing heroes, vulnerability was more valued than strength, and the kind of commanding presence that Peppard projected was starting to feel outdated. Television beckoned as a lifeline, but for a man who considered himself a serious actor, the small screen felt like artistic exile. When his agent approached him about a new action series called The A-Team, Peppard's initial response was reportedly, "I don't do television." Television is where careers go to die. How wrong he would be, and how prophetic those words would become. The premise of The A-Team was simple. 4 Vietnam veterans, wrongly accused of a crime, operate as soldiers of fortune while evading military authorities. Peppard would play Colonel John Hannibal Smith, the team's brilliant leader whose catchphrase, "I love it when a plan comes together," would become iconic. For Peppard, the role represented everything he'd always wanted: complete authority over a team of subordinates, action sequences that showcased his physicality, and scripts that portrayed him as an unquestioned tactical genius. He signed on immediately, envisioning the A-Team as his personal showcase, a weekly demonstration of George Peppard's natural leadership and masculine superiority. But the producers had other plans brewing that would shatter Peppard's vision of total control. They'd found a wild card unlike anything television had ever seen. A mohawked, gold-wearing, milk-drinking former bouncer named Mr. T, whose mere presence would overshadow every other element of the show. And George Peppard, who'd spent his entire career demanding to be the center of attention, was about to meet his match in a way that would consume him with rage for the next 5 years. The stage was set for television's most explosive behind-the-scenes war, a battle between old Hollywood sophistication and raw street authenticity that would leave both men scarred and their friendship destroyed forever. But that was just the beginning of the nightmare. But beneath that commanding exterior and military precision, one name would become George Peppard's obsession, carved into his psyche like shrapnel that could never be removed. Incident number 1. The First Meeting. January 1983, Universal Studios backlot. The A-Team cast was gathering for their first table read, and George Peppard arrived expecting to meet his supporting players, actors who would defer to his decades of experience and natural authority. Instead, he encountered a phenomenon that defied every rule of Hollywood hierarchy he'd ever known. Mr. T burst into the conference room wearing more gold jewelry than most people see in a lifetime, his mohawk perfectly sculpted, commanding attention without saying a single word. The room's energy shifted instantly, conversations stopped, and everyone turned to stare at this impossible figure who seemed to have stepped out of a comic book. But it wasn't just Mr. T's appearance that rattled Peppard, it was his complete lack of deference to Hollywood protocol. While other actors introduced themselves with respectful handshakes and careful pleasantries, Mr. T announced his presence like a force of nature arriving exactly where it belonged. "I ain't playing no second fiddle to nobody," Mr. T allegedly announced during introductions, his voice booming with street-corner confidence that made Peppard's carefully modulated tones sound almost effeminate by comparison. The battle lines were drawn before filming even began. Hollywood polish versus raw authenticity, and both men knew only one could emerge victorious. Incident number 2. The Script Wars. March 1983, during filming of the pilot episode. Peppard had spent weeks studying his character, developing elaborate backstories and tactical approaches that would showcase Hannibal's intellectual superiority over his teammates. The original script supported this vision, giving Peppard the majority of dialogue and positioning him as the team's undisputed mastermind. But after the first day of shooting, something unprecedented happened. Mr. T's B.A. Baracus was stealing every scene without even trying. Test audiences were going wild for the mohawked mechanic's one-liners and physical comedy, while Peppard's sophisticated tactical discussions were met with polite applause. Network executives quickly realized they had a breakout star on their hands, and it wasn't their expensive leading man. The rewrite sessions that followed were brutal for Peppard's ego. Lines he'd carefully crafted for Hannibal were reassigned to other characters, and Mr. T's role expanded from supporting player to co-lead virtually overnight. Watching his carefully planned character arc being dismantled to accommodate an untrained amateur felt like professional assassination. "They're turning my character into a supporting role in his own show," Peppard reportedly raged to the producers after viewing early dailies. But the ratings didn't lie, and in television, numbers trump egos every single time. Incident number 3, the publicity ambush, September 1983, the A-Team premiere press tour. Peppard had envisioned himself as the sophisticated spokesman for the series, drawing on his classical training and film experience to elevate the show's profile in the media. Instead, he found himself consistently upstaged by Mr. T's natural charisma and quotable sound bites. While Peppard offered thoughtful analysis of his character's military background, Mr. T delivered pure entertainment gold. I pity the fool who don't watch the A-Team. The media loved it. Talk show hosts fought to book Mr. T, magazine covers featured his distinctive image, and children across America began sporting mohawks and gold chains. Peppard, meanwhile, found himself relegated to secondary interviews and technical discussions about the show's action sequences. The psychological impact on Peppard was devastating. After decades of believing that intelligence and sophistication would always triumph over raw charisma, he was witnessing the opposite in real time. America preferred Mr. T's authentic street wisdom to his carefully cultivated Hollywood polish. The final insult came during a joint appearance on The Tonight Show, when Johnny Carson spent the entire segment asking Mr. T about his jewelry and childhood while treating Peppard like an afterthought. I've been acting for 30 years, and this amateur is getting all the attention, Peppard allegedly muttered to his agent after the taping. Pride builds legends, but jealousy builds monsters. Incident number 4, the salary showdown. Spring 1984 contract renegotiation time. Despite being the show's nominal star, Peppard discovered that Mr. T was demanding and receiving equal pay for what had originally been conceived as a supporting role. The numbers told the story. A-Team merchandise featuring Mr. T was outselling Hannibal products by a margin of 10-1. Action figures, lunchboxes, Halloween costumes. America's children wanted to be B.A. Baracus, not Colonel Smith. For a man who'd spent his entire career believing that talent and experience should determine value, this market-driven rejection felt like a personal attack on everything he represented. The entertainment industry was revealing its true nature, a business that valued popularity over artistry, authenticity over training. I'm not splitting top billing with someone who learned to act in the gymnasium, Peppard reportedly told the producers during heated negotiations. But the network's response was swift and brutal. Mr. T got his raise, and Peppard was reminded that television was a business, not an artistic endeavor. The war was escalating beyond personal animosity into professional survival. Incident number 5. The Wardrobe Wars. Fall 1985, midway through the show's 3rd season. The constant tension had begun affecting every aspect of production, and even costume fittings became battlegrounds for dominance and control. Peppard had always been meticulous about his appearance, viewing Hannibal's wardrobe as an extension of his character's sophisticated military bearing. But when Mr. T began wearing increasingly elaborate gold jewelry combinations that drew more attention than Peppard's carefully chosen accessories, the competition became absurd. According to witnesses, Peppard allegedly demanded that the costume department provide him with more distinctive accessories to compete with Mr. T's natural flash. When the producers gently suggested that Colonel Smith's character wouldn't wear excessive jewelry, Peppard reportedly exploded, "So his character can wear a fortune in gold, but mine has to look like a middle management accountant." The incident revealed how deeply the competition had affected Peppard's judgment, reducing a classically trained actor to competing with street style he fundamentally didn't understand. Incident number 6. The Breaking Point. December 1986, the set of the A-Team's 4th season. 3 years of accumulated resentment had transformed the workplace into a toxic battlefield where every interaction carried the potential for explosion. The incident that finally shattered their relationship allegedly occurred during filming of The Road to Hope, when Mr. T ad-libbed a line that got huge laughs from the crew. Peppard, who'd been struggling with a complex technical dialogue scene, witnessed his co-star effortlessly command the room's attention and respect. According to witnesses, Peppard stormed off the set, returning an hour later to deliver an ultimatum that would echo through Hollywood for decades. Either he goes or I go. This show isn't big enough for both of us. The producers faced an impossible choice: keep their trained professional or their breakout phenomenon. The decision would haunt the series until its final episode. Who was Mr. T? To understand why George Peppard felt so threatened, you need to understand the force of nature he was up against. Mr. T, born Lawrence Tureau in Chicago's Robert Taylor Homes housing project, was everything Peppard was not: authentic, unpretentious, and utterly comfortable in his own skin. Where Peppard had crafted his persona through years of classical training and careful image management, Mr. T's magnetism was raw and unfiltered. A former bouncer who'd earned his reputation protecting celebrities in Chicago's toughest clubs, he brought street credibility that no acting school could teach. His mohawk wasn't a costume choice. It was a symbol of his African warrior heritage. His gold chains weren't props. They represented every job he'd worked and every obstacle he'd overcome. When Mr. T said, "I pity the fool," it carried the weight of genuine experience, not scripted bravado. The most infuriating aspect of Mr. T's success, from Peppard's perspective, was how effortless it appeared. While Peppard had spent decades perfecting his craft through rigorous study and painful self-discipline, Mr. T seemed to achieve the same results through pure authenticity and natural charisma. But Mr. T's appeal went deeper than surface flash. Growing up in one of Chicago's most dangerous neighborhoods, he'd learned survival skills that translated perfectly to television's demands for genuine toughness. His protective instincts toward children and his unwavering moral code gave him an authenticity that scripted dialogue could never replicate. For audiences hungry for authenticity in an increasingly artificial entertainment landscape, Mr. T represented something revolutionary. A performer who was exactly who he appeared to be, without pretense or apology. His success challenged every assumption about what made a star, proving that genuine character could triumph over traditional training, and that authenticity was kryptonite to George Peppard's carefully constructed image of sophisticated authority. The feud between George Peppard and Mr. T ultimately destroyed what could have been television's greatest partnership. Their personal war poisoned the set, exhausted the cast and crew, and probably shortened the show's lifespan by several seasons. The toxic atmosphere created by their conflict affected everyone involved in the production. Dirk Benedict and Dwight Schultz, the other two members of the A-Team, found themselves walking on eggshells, careful not to appear to favor either side in the ongoing war. Guest stars reported feeling uncomfortable with the obvious tension, and crew members began requesting transfers to other shows to escape the hostile environment. Peppard never publicly reconciled with his co-star, carrying his resentment to his grave in 1994. In his final interviews, he still couldn't bring himself to acknowledge Mr. T's contributions to the A-Team's success, referring to him only as that other actor with barely concealed disdain. But perhaps the real tragedy is what their conflict reveals about the entertainment industry's inability to celebrate different types of talent simultaneously. Peppard's classical training and Mr. T's natural charisma could have complemented each other perfectly, creating something greater than the sum of their individual parts. Instead, their ego war became a cautionary tale about the destructive power of professional jealousy and the price of refusing to adapt to changing times. Peppard's inability to accept that audiences might value authenticity over sophistication ultimately diminished his own legacy and robbed fans of witnessing true collaboration between two iconic performers. The entertainment industry lost more than just a successful show when the A-Team ended. It lost an opportunity to prove that different styles of talent could coexist and enhance each other rather than compete for dominance. In the end, Both men were diminished by their hatred, Peppard's legacy forever tainted by his pettiness, and Mr. T's television career hampered by the toxic atmosphere their feud created. So what do you think? Was George Peppard justified in his resentment, or was he simply unable to accept that talent comes in many forms? Team Peppard or Team Mr. T? Drop your choice in the comments below and tell us why. And here's your Easter egg challenge from earlier. Did you catch the reference to Peppard's Breakfast at Tiffany's co-star hidden in this story? First person to spot it gets a heart from us. Don't forget to smash that subscribe button for more explosive Hollywood feuds that the studios tried to hide. Tomorrow, we're diving into the shocking truth behind why Gene Roddenberry and William Shatner nearly destroyed Star Trek before it even began. Trust me, you won't want to miss that nuclear meltdown.